Hello everyone, it's Jamal Thomas. Welcome to the Progressive Soapbox. So guys, I have with me tonight, and let me check my volume, make sure my levels are okay. I have with me tonight Cynthia McKinney. She was nice enough to come online. She is in Bangladesh right now, so the internet coverage is not the greatest in the world, so we're going to do this by phone line. Professor McKinney, please tell the audience hello.
Hello, audience. I hope my audios are okay as well.
No, you're okay. You're okay. You've been you were in Congress for 6 terms. That's an amazing development in and of itself. I mean, from the standpoint of getting elected over and over again, especially for a lefty, could consistently go back and forth. And now you're in Bangladesh. So I have several questions that I want to ask, but I want to ask just the basic. How did you end up in politics, just in the very first place?
Well, my dad was in politics, and basically my father was a part of the civil rights movement. He was one of the first black police officers in the city of Atlanta. And of course, this is during a time when the black police officers were discriminated against. They was had to enforce, quote unquote, the law in segregated conditions. And so my father, recognizing that this was an insult to his dignity and the dignity of all people, and so he protested. He protested alone because everybody else was really afraid to protest the police, right?
Yeah. You say he protested alone?
He protested alone.
That is amazing.
He had me on his shoulder. And so at
Fair enough.
4, he would hoist me up onto his shoulder and in his uniform, because the rule was that the black police officers could not change out of or into their uniforms at the police headquarters. They would have to go down the street around the corner to the black YMCA.
Oh, wow.
And that's where they had to change their uniforms. And so my dad would get off work and then protest in his uniform. And, so you could say that my rebellious, rambunctious ways came directly from my father. And so every time he would protest, then a black person would get promoted. He would not get promoted because, of course, you cannot allow the agent of change to be the recipient of the benefit of the change.
Right. And well, yeah, because at that point you allow this kind of, it's like hostage taking of sorts in a weird, warped way. It's like, if you give them something, it incentivizes them to continue to do this kind of protest for change.
That's right. And so at the end of the day, what I learned was sacrifice without reward. That's what I learned. That, okay, so I have a set of values. I'm going to live by my values, and if I get punished because of my values, that will be the norm, actually.
Wow. Yeah, it's funny. There's this and I can understand why people think that way. They think just because they do good, that good would follow. Just because they do good, they will be rewarded for that good. And it's like when you look over history, that's not necessarily true. I mean, the people who've been agents of change have suffered miserably, for that change.
Right.
There's this talk where Cornel West is talking about Martin Luther King and how Martin Luther King gets, pulled into a jail cell, and they're like dogs barking at him, and these cops are, threatening him and abusing him. And he comes out like shattered or shaken. And he's just making this point, this is what I must bear for my people. This idea that change requires somebody to take the lift. Oh, wow. That's amazing. That's amazing. Your dad is a remarkably brave man, to put it lightly.
Yes, he is.
That is
which hurts me in my personal life, right? Yeah. Because when I look at men, I measure them
By your
by
dad.
what I experienced with my dad. And unfortunately, there's the majority of the men that I encounter don't measure up. That has been my station in life.
That's hilarious. It's funny. It's like this implicit education that you get. You know what I mean? It's like you're
That's right.
whatever.
Yes.
You soak in that stuff. Is people sometimes forget that everything that they are comes from something outside of them being stuffed into them. You know, in their way of aggregating that data. Let me ask
Yes.
you this:
Yes.
you were in Congress for 6 years. This was for Georgia, the state of
12 terms. 12 years, 6 terms.
Okay, 12 years, 6 terms. Okay.
Uh-huh.
Let me ask you this. What was the difference? Because from my standpoint, I look at politics and I have a somewhat cynical view of politics, but I think my viewpoint is
You
somewhat right.
should.
Well, right. 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 I read this book that opened my eyes to politics. I think the guy's name was Bruce De La Sente or something like that. But his point was all of this stuff is somewhat political gamesmanship based on this idea of power, and you use the resources you have to get what you want, and whatever they come up with is this kind of narrative is just there to try to get them from point A to point B. All of this is what do you want to accomplish, and what does the political person have at their disposal to do it. This idea of we're fighting for values and all this other stuff becomes less relevant. What was the
No.
what?
I would not say that the fight for values becomes less relevant
Okay.
under that scenario. No, because the values define the individual, and the individual defines defines the fight. So
That's right.
whether one engages in the fight, whatever the fight might actually end up being, is determined by the values of the individual, I believe. And so therefore, none of that is irrelevant or predetermined.
Well, wait. Let me modify what I mean by that. I just mean there's a modifier in the process. Like if we were talking about an ideal world where there was no money or any kind of influence, it's like I'm not going to give you this money or I'm going to use this money against you. If none of that stuff was outside of the process, then your values, would be the thing that determines how you go about a political fight and what you do and what you push for. And pushing, putting trillions of dollars on the backs of the American public, those are values. Those are somebody's values. Those are not necessarily the best values in the world. But we can agree that there's a modifier in the way that politics goes about, meaning cash. It runs on cash. You need a ton of money to get elected. Is that fair?
Yes, you need. I mean, that's a statement of fact that you need money in order to get elected.
And let me ask you this, because there's two parts to this question. What was the difference between what you thought politics was versus what it was once you got elected? I am so curious about that. Everybody has these ideas of, what is it like behind the scenes? And you've been behind the scenes to some degree. What was the difference? This is what I thought this was versus, okay, this is what this actually is.
I've been very deep behind the scenes to the extent that I understand politics at a level that very few people have that understanding.
Right.
Now, there's a huge manipulation that takes place almost at the root. And it is that huge manipulation against which my values lead me to struggle. Whereas most people either remain onlookers or become complicit in the charade.
Mm-hmm. Oh, go ahead. I'm listening. I wasn't. I was listening to what you're saying. I guess that's working around the corners. Like, what does that mean? To say I've seen, the onlooker thing. Like that's around the corners. That's using euphemisms. Be specific on this. And I know there's no hard way to be specific because the question is somewhat kind of atmospheric in a way. It's almost like esoteric in the question. But let me give an example. When I started doing tubing, when I started doing this, I didn't realize that the alignments that you end up with, like you do a story, you're just doing a channel, And then you find out that sometimes people end up in alignments. They end up in these kind of cliques, the way they aggregate around each other. So, this guy is friends with this guy who's friends with this guy. And so now any story that you do, if it's dealing with that particular topic, it leans, it tilts. It doesn't quite get, to the oomph that would be there if that particular alignment wasn't there. I've chosen to be a lone wolf after seeing how that works, because that feels it's weird. It feels like an entanglement, or even the clicks thing, like trying to actually do videos that get people to watch, and then you get up with certain demonetizations and stuff like that, so your incentives push you a particular way. I guess what I'm asking is, what are the incentives that are built into the system that you found once you got in office that you didn't necessarily know were there before you got office?
Okay, what are systemic incentives?
Right.
Well, I mean, in a long, healthy life, the ability to sustain yourself, your family, and maybe your extended family without any problem.
No. I'm talking about in Congress. Like when you got elected into Congress, what were the things that you thought politics was versus what were the things politics actually ended up being? I'm trying to delineate that difference between your perception of what politics was the day before you took office versus when you left office. What were the differences between those points of views?
Well, I thought that I would be able to take my values to Washington, D.C. and then deliver on behalf of the people who sent me there. And what I discovered is that there are very evil forces that intervene in between that goal, and then they divert most people away from that goal.
Well, evil forces. Are you framing people in this way? Like,
Yes,
like for example,
I'm framing people in this way because ultimately, the system is a good system or a bad system based on the people that are in the system.
Yeah.
And if the people in the system are bad people, and the system is one that has proliferated the bad people to the detriment of the good people, then we not only have to look at the individuals who are involved, but we have to look at the system itself. So, for example, I teach political systems, and there are many different political systems that are possible. But what we, and when I say we, that's like the world, has been told by certain individuals is that the indirect democracy of the republic is the best form of government to have. And so we think that our system is a good system because we have a republic, and the republic is the highest form of political governance that exists. Well, I disagree with that. And so basically what the republic requires us to do is to give up our individual sovereignty, pass it over to someone else, and then entrust our sovereignty to that person. And when we need something, rather than coalescing with other people of like mind to provide that for that need, we have to go to the people to whom we've surrendered our sovereignty and ask them to act on our behalf. Whereas, as you correctly point out, that there are these other forces that mediate in between the surrendering of our sovereignty and the delivery of policy that benefits us.
Yeah.
And this is the nature of indirect democracy, which a republic is one form. Whereas what I witnessed in Libya was direct democracy. Now, of course, direct democracy was under attack by those who benefit from indirect democracy. Now, who benefits from indirect democracy? It seems that when we have indirect democracy, of which the republic is purportedly the highest form, we have kakistocracies. That means that people are able to rise to the top who are totally unprepared, but in terms of the values that, say, are expressed in the state's constitution, they don't adhere to those values by their actions.
Yeah, they don't.
And we can tell that by their actions. And not only are indirect democracies prone to kakistocracy, which means that you have the worst, least competent, most incompetent people rising to the top and becoming leadership of this governing structure. Then not only is kakistocracy what we experience, but we also experience psychopathocracy.
Oh God, yes.
Because now you've got people who are literally and truly, if they were in a clinical psychological setting, would be characterized as psychopaths. Mm-hmm. And they proliferate at the top. And one we all have to look at is Gina Haspel as the most recent example of that, where John Kiriakou said that she tortured just for torture's sake.
Yeah.
And of course, you know that they have the video links. So certain people who have this inclination can actually watch the torture, being performed and say, oh, wow, this is wonderful. Let's do some more of this. And so what we have in the United States is an indirect democracy, the republic, where the most incompetent people have risen to the top, and they also happen to be psychopaths. And we think that that is normal. And they have put us in a completely abnormal condition, political condition. And then through their complicit conspirators, the media, the mass media, and the left gatekeeping media, lead us to believe that this abnormal situation is normal. Well, maybe it is normal. If we go back and we look at other republics around the world, maybe what we would see at this particular point in time is that what we think is abnormal and abhorrent to our values actually is normal. And so what our struggle is against the normalization of the abnormal. Yeah. Therefore, we need to start looking at different methodologies that people use in order to govern themselves. And of course, the Native Americans, if you go back to indigenous methodologies where there was a circle of elders, and the circle of elders sort of cared for the community. They also cared for Mother Earth because they understood that the earth sustains everything and that we are not in competition with Earth. We need to live in a symbiotic state with Mother Nature. So there are indigenous methods of governance. There are, and what the Libyans were doing was direct democracy. And this is all spelled out in the Green Book, which was written by Muammar Gaddafi. The Green Book was actually studied in military school by Hugo Chavez, which is the reason that Chavez and Gaddafi were such great mutual admirers. and ended up actually working together to unite Latin America and Africa on a basis of self-governance, independent self-governance, respect, mutual respect, and this idea, the Libyans called it Jamahariya, the South Africans call it Ubuntu, but however you call it, it is a respect for the individual and that individual that leads the policy, and the individual leads the community, and the community actually responds to the needs of the individuals that comprise it. Whereas now, public policy that's made in Washington, D.C. has nothing to do with me. It doesn't have anything to do with you. It doesn't have anything to do with my next door neighbor. It doesn't have anything to do with the benefit of the people in my neighborhood or in my community. No, It benefits that small group, that small Socratic group of psychopaths who are now in charge.
Yeah, man, I agree with you. And in that, you actually hit like two of my questions that I was leading up to. Because, I don't think people are just inherently bad. I don't think people are inherently anything. I think people are like water in a bowl. However that bowl is shaped, the people are going to conform to the values of that bowl. In our system, the values are maximize your profit and, get rich or die trying and, by hook or by crook. And in a society like that, where wealth is this kind of deification of there's this deification of wealth, it's not insane that people would do things in order to accrue wealth, even if that's not necessarily the best for the societal benefit. So I guess what I'm saying is, if you have a political system that's sloshing around in cash, it's not insane that the people are going to behave in ways that allows them to get their hands on that cash. And yeah, it makes them to some degree psychopaths. I mean, we sell weapons to Saudi Arabia knowing that Saudi Arabia is out there starving Yemens, or at the very least weaponizing starvation or weaponizing disease in order to kill Yemenis. We have a weird system, and we consider that system to be normal. And I agree with you. I don't necessarily think the way our values are arranged are all that normal. I guess if you can say any kind of normality exists. It's like, what would human beings be, or what would the political system be without the corrupting influence of cash? And you hit on something else. Media is complicit.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you hit on this other point. Media is complicit. My question is always, do the media know, or does the media just not say? Meaning, are they incompetent or are they corrupt? Do they just know what's going on behind the scenes from the political standpoint, and they just don't say? I mean, is that what's taking place?
Okay, well, when the media, when individuals in the media, because remember, all of these institutions are populated by individuals.
Yes.
And so the character of the individuals determines the character of these institutions.
Yes.
So, first of all, I want to get back to values, because values are important. Mm-hmm. And individual values are the most important. What do we stand for? What do I stand for? What are my values? These are questions that I ask as I prepare my students for leadership. These are the questions that are integral to the quality and character of their leadership. Yeah. Who are you? And what do you stand for? So I ask myself that question. I recently on my Twitter page, I put a restatement of my values, because I thought it was important for people to know exactly who and what I was. Yeah. And so what I wrote on these wars, my position on the current wars: not one more dime, not one more penny, Agreed. Not one more bomb, not one more missile, not one more child, not one more veteran, not one more lie. Bring them all home now. Mercenaries. Now, this was what caused a little confusion when I wrote mercenaries. But by that, who do I call the mercenaries? The mercenaries are the U.S. contractors who are not in the U.S. military, but they're performing a military role in countries around the world. Sometimes they get captured, and then the U.S. has struggled to get them released because they were performing a governmental mission, but they were not U.S. soldiers. U.S. contractors who are killing people around the world are mercenaries. So that's why I said mercenaries too. Rebuild America, peace now. Did I make myself clear? Okay, so now these are my values, and so I make it clear that these are the values that motivate my behavior. My political public behavior are motivated by these values. So I'm going to look at who's ordering the killing, who's ordering the wars, who's paying for the wars, and I'm going to ask them to investigate themselves. If you happen to be a U.S. taxpayer, you're paying for this. Is this what you really stand for? And if it's not what you stand for, what are you prepared to do in order to stop it? Okay, now, we've got, when you mention the sort of personal values, I thought about, media, about money, moving the system.
Yeah.
Well, I thought about Tupac. There's a line in one of Tupac's songs. I think it's Changes. And he says, I earned a G today. And then it's like there's two people talking with each other. It's a conversation. And the one person says, I earned a G today. And then Tupac comes back and says, but you earned it in a sleazy way.
Yeah.
So now the values lost in our community. I want to say that our music used to reinforce our values, but now our music totally degrades those values that allowed us to survive so much. I just responded to a tweet by Tariq Nasheed, which I'm supposed to know because I don't know who Tariq Nasheed is, but somebody sent it to me, right? One of my friends sent it to me and said, what do you think about this? And so then I responded, well, actually, let me see. I responded that, let me find it. Sorry, I wasn't prepared for this.
Let me say something real quick, though. I have to be honest. I think I may, that if I...
No, I got it. And I want to say this.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Okay. That a woman was found hanging from a tree in Atlanta by a Walmart near Old National Highway this morning. This is the morning of the 14th, which is today your time. It's already tomorrow for me in Asia. Okay, so my response was no foul play because Black people hanging from trees is standard operating procedure for Georgia and the U.S. We even have a song about it, Strange Fruit. Yeah. Okay, so if the police say it's standard operating procedure, why should we expect anything different? Okay, so but anyway, now the values become, for me, transcendent over everything else because it's our values that are under attack. Steve Biko said, the greatest weapon in the hands of the oppressors is the mind of the oppressed.
Yeah, I agree.
So if my values lead me to challenge oppression at every turn, and then my values are attacked by the oppressors, and I change my values, then the oppressors get away scot-free. And this is what I see happening. You mentioned about the media. So is the media complicit? or incompetent or corrupt. Well, the
Right.
media definitely
That's
are
brutal,
complicit.
but that's the way I
These are
ask the question. Like when I see
people
Chuck Todd,
who know what
yeah,
they're doing. These are people who know what they're doing. When you get a WikiLeaks document and email that says, okay, we're going to feed this story to this person because this person is with us, that person knows.
yeah,
And WikiLeaks has performed a service because
yes,
they let us now know
doing God's
how
work.
these people operate. They let us know the values of these people. When CNN questions to Hillary Clinton gets passed over to Hillary Clinton, there's a whole string of values where people should say, no, I'm not going to engage in this. This is what I teach my students. This is ethics.
This is
But you see, we don't have ethics anymore. So if we don't have ethics, then we don't have values. And if we don't have values, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. told us a man can ride your back only if it's bent.
No,
we are bending our back.
I agree. I think I agree with the overwhelming majority of that. I do want to pick a bone with one or two parts of that. The values thing. Yeah, I agree with you. So one part. One of the things that was stark to me, where you know sometimes you hit your head on something that says, "Oh my God, I was thinking about this massively wrong." The reason why the corrupt versus incompetent thing. Tulsi Gabbard goes to Syria. She goes with Dennis Kucinich. Tulsi Gabbard comes back and says the United States is arming terrorists in that region of the world, and they just want us to stop arming terrorists. Now Jake Tapper hears this, and Jake Tapper reflexively, immediately, the United States government says it's not doing that. Now, Jake Tapper's stammering, stuttering, he's caught off guard by this, but Jake Tapper knew. Jake Tapper didn't tell his audience, nor did Jake Tapper actually care what the reality and the truth of it was. Jake Tapper was doing a line. He was essentially staying with the narrative that the United States government wrote, almost as stenographers. Then later on you find what Tulsi Gabbard said was absolutely correct. Did Jake Tapper, was he incompetent, or was he essentially just a scribe for the government itself? That brought that home clearer than anything else. They know. It's like they know. They're just not saying. The second part, the ethics part. I'm more inclined to believe that a system itself drives the person's behavior. Like that values are emergent. Like if you were in a situation that was a hellish scenario, you do what you need to do in order to get by to feed your family. If a person had to do something in order to pay for his kid, is that person going to say, my values are going to lead me to this higher path and let my kid go hungry? Or is that person going to do what they need to do to feed their kid? If that person had the resources necessary, yeah, that person is going to or may be more inclined to choose a better choice. I guess what I'm saying is, and I don't want you to misunderstand me, I agree with you that values matter. Value matters greatly. When I do this show, I do the show from a humanistic perspective. That's my stake in the world, and everything else is relative to that particular stake. But I am also perfectly aware that many of the people in Washington are motivated by a different stake. That stake is drastically different than the stake that I put into the world. And so when I look at them, I have to ask why. And part of this comes down to they are incentivized either in a political space or in a corporate space to take certain behaviors. And not us, too, human beings. This kind of, plantations that we call jobs, where we work for 40, 50 hours a week for somebody else's profit. The social impact of what we do matters less than the fact that we're eating and fed and we can feed our kids and everything else. Coal miners.
Tomorrow.
Go for it.
Tomorrow.
Am I wrong?
There's a word for that.
Go for it.
And the word, when you're confronted with that, is revolution.
Fair enough.
I think there are many people who have forgotten the basic vocabulary of struggle. And so Dr. King said we need a revolution of values. He used the word revolution, and we don't say revolution anymore.
No, they scrub
There's
that
a
out.
term for what you're describing. You're describing structural violence. And so now what is our responsibility when violence and injustice are built into the system because of the people that populate the system? What is our responsibility? Well, we have a responsibility to fight that. Those of us who are awake, have a responsibility for justice. And there's certain behaviors that are associated with that responsibility, that come with that responsibility. So for the fact that you and I are having this discussion now, it's very important because we're having a very public discussion and we're allowing people to have the space to wonder about these things themselves. Mm-hmm. You're bringing up very legitimate issues that people have to feed themselves, but does that obviate their responsibility for justice? No, it does not. So what is it that they can do? And we, as a people who have struggled up until most recent times against this structural violence, we as a people know more than anybody else about the various ways in which we can struggle. If you're inside the system, then you become the spook who sits next to the door.
Yeah.
Right?
So
we have roles that people can play as long as they want to assume the responsibility for justice. And what I'm saying is, I don't care where you are in a system that's broken, you have a responsibility for justice. But we have just thrown that responsibility away, in my opinion. Mm-hmm. And we make excuses, and then the excuse becomes a full stop. Whereas the excuse is just a comma.
How do you push back on that? So I have this idea that resistance is not within the political structure, at least not fully. I think it needs to be dual. I think people need to pull themselves out of the Democratic Party. The party is not necessarily working in your best interests. And even if you don't necessarily have anywhere to go, to be under this thing of solidarity of no, I'm done. You guys are not representing my interests. I am not going to be the political abused spouse or the politically equivalent of abused spouse. Lefties in that party, I compare them to the abused spouses. It's like you can beat me, slap me, I explain away the black eye, and yet I'm still voting Democrat. And I make the point that the only reason he beats you and slaps you is because he knows that at the end of the day, you're still going to fix him a ham sandwich. You're still voting Democrat. At the point where the party can look at the person, a group, and say, you have nowhere else to go. We're talking about blacks, Hispanics, workers, unions. You have nowhere else to go. So yes, I'm going to take this cash, and I'm going to do the bidding of the people who are giving me that cash, and I'm going to give you lip service. Am I wrong on this? Is there a better way to do this? How do you struggle in the current times from the standpoint of maybe politics, internal and outside the political structure?
Well, first of all, I say that no is the most powerful word in politics. And therefore, we need to learn, those of us who struggle against structural violence and structural injustice, need to learn how to say no. We, the people who are oppressed, need to learn how to say no. And you're right about the Democratic Party. I love your comment about the solidarity of no. Yes, I love that.
Because I look at it as there's nothing else. Like, it's one thing if this was the 30s and you had movements, you had unions, you had, socialists, you had all these things pushing and tugging against the political structure, trying to get something to change, scaring the hell out of whoever, was in the Democratic Party, pulling these guys to the left because their left was open. That doesn't exist. Once the Democratic Party, 1992, Bill Clinton comes in office. He comes in, you come in with him. Not with Bill Clinton, I'm just saying, I think you came in 92. That new type of Democrat,
we came in together.
That third-way Democrat, or third-way Democrats, with this kind of new idea of, hey, we can cater to the plutocrat, we can go for the top 10%, and we can essentially do what needs to be done because we're the Democratic Party and labor is going to come with us because they don't have a choice. There's nothing else. Like, I guess I make this point of, It's one thing if you had all of these things pulling on a political structure that pulls a party to the left. I don't know where they are. There are no movements in this way anymore, and there's nothing else pulling it. The only thing that scares them is potentially losing, which is like, this is an ugly brick, but it is a brick nonetheless.
Yes, pulling out of the Democratic Party is the only sensible thing to do for thinking, values-laden individuals who want to make an impact on the current political system.
Let me ask you something. You were against NAFTA. You were against the defense bill, essentially the bill, the War Authorization Act. You were against all these things. All of these things, I would say, have proved to be somewhat disastrous. Meaning, part of the reason that Hillary Clinton lost in a funny way is that those people looked at, like, Wisconsin, Ohio, Pennsylvania, places that were hollowed out by some of these policies. Why were you against these things? Now, what was it that back then? Are you psychic and haven't told anybody? What were your special powers that gave you this foresight of saying, you know what, this is not going to work out well for the people who I'm here to represent?
Well, the people themselves spoke. And then in Washington, D.C., I carried that message from Georgia to D.C. But that was not my words. That was the words of the people.
That's interesting. You know, it's funny. It's so rare to hear politicians say, well, I'm the avatar of the people. I'm just doing what the people wanted me to do. Usually they're just doing whatever they want to do in that office.
That's true.
Is it fixable? Is it redeemable? I have people on my channel who say the political system is completely unworkable. There's nothing you can do with it. Toss it. Think of something else, because no change is going to come through the political system itself. Do you take that as right, or do you say, no, there is some redemption in this political system? And if so, how do you get that redemption in this sense? Or how do you get that change to take place, if it's possible at all?
Well, of course, change is always possible. And actually, I teach change. I learned change as a part of my PhD, change theory.
Well, no, I'm talking about in the way I guess what I'm saying, the way the political system has been arranged. Like, because we've gotten to the point where these districts are grossly gerrymandered. You have this thing where the Democratic Party itself has started to literally say, we're going to dictate who the candidates are all throughout the United States. Yeah. It's amazing. Like, I've never seen anything like it. They literally claim the right to say, look, we're going to make the choice on who the candidates are. We're going to put our thumb on the scale before the public even makes a choice. And you have Steny Hoyer and Nancy Pelosi saying, yes, this is absolutely right. You had another woman in the Democratic Party who was making this argument that superdelegates were perfectly right because the Democratic Party knows best when it's choosing their candidates. I mean, this stuff is amazing. This is like immensely undemocratic. And this is what they're pushing.
But who expected? There's always been this, right? So now we know that this is the situation. These are the circumstances. Let's get back to real struggle, right? Yeah. Let's get back to revolution. Let's get back to actually identifying ourselves independently and not as Democrat through a political party.
Oh, I agree. No, I mean, I see what you mean. I see what you mean. You're making a point that, like, this is not purely a political struggle. This, like, any kind of filter, any kind of lens through the standpoint of pure politics is going to miss the point. Like, it's like you're not going to get what you want through the political system. I guess that's what you're saying.
I think well, first of all, we haven't tried everything, but we need to try some things that are different.
Oh, I agree. No, I agree. I fully agree.
I agree with you. And I love your idea of the solidarity of the no. The solidarity of no. I love that. So let's just tell the Democratic Party no.
I've been screaming it. I've been screaming it into every mic I can find. Like, because, look, it's not that I love the Republican Party. I think they're loathsome. I think they're horrendous. But my problem is, you can never break the model.
This isn't about anything. party.
Yeah, right.
This isn't about
Exactly.
any party. This is about us and our own dignity,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
And so, you are so right when you compare the relationship with the Democratic Party to the abused spouse. At some point, you say no. You walk away. You say, I am not going to take that abuse anymore. Otherwise, at some point, I'm going to start asking, okay, well, maybe that you love abuse. You're one of those rare birds that just loves torture.
It's like, I like being hit. I like it when he hits me. He hits me because he loves me. So let me ask you this.
But
oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Thing.
I don't want to interrupt.
Thinking about it. As I think about it, you see, it's very difficult to build, because building means that you've got to stand up on your own 2 feet and use your brain, your heart, your gut, and your hands and create something totally new. But that's what we need to do. And I am absolutely certain that people of like mind and like heart and like gut will eventually coalesce around the obvious need to build something new. And then the work get busy on the work of doing that. So either we cower in fear, or we approach the future with uncertainty. We don't know what we're going to get, but we know we're gonna get there through our own struggle.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. I love that you said that. It's
yeah.
Because I guess my feeling is, like anything else, until you get to the point of saying I'm done, nothing changes. It's like having a job that you absolutely hate, and then going to something else is like, okay, this is uncertain to me. My wife and I are planning on traveling. I was telling you this before the video. And, both of us switched into something that allows us to be remote. And, there's this thing of fear associated with it because it's completely, uncharted territory. But it's different. And it's something that may be better, that you're trying to build to be something better. I'm trying to do something different. I'm trying to do something better. I guess I make this point that the whole point of politics is to actually get stuff done. People sometimes forget that politics is to actually get stuff done. You're an avatar of those people who put you in that office. That's why I loved your answer. And that's lost. Like, this gets lost in the whole business of politics. Again, that's why I love your other answer of, I thought I would be able to get things done for the people when I got into office. And it's like, it wasn't that.
I know. It's funny now. You just joke.
It's sad. Like, it's terrifyingly sad. We learn in school that politics is, these high-minded ideas and everything else. And then you find out when you get into office, it's nothing like that. What's his name? He's a Republican. I think his name's Jolly. He comes to find out that 75% of the time he was in office, he spent on the phones begging for money. And it's like,
that's right.
If that's your reality, like, what? It's like, certainly your politics is going to be skewed in a particular way when that's your reality. Man, that's awesome. I love that you agree with me on that, because there are some lefties out there who I like, who are pushing hard to try to pull people into the party, kind of missing the point that if you really want to save the party, you need to pull yourself out the party. That this goes a little bit beyond this party stuff, The
Democratic Party will never change because of the people who have captured it. And those people have they have no intention of going anywhere.
Exactly.
So now either you associate yourself with those values of those people who aren't going anywhere. I mean, if you just take a look at the Democratic Party, it had the opportunity. Okay, so they shafted Bernie, and I think Bernie was an authentic candidate.
I did too.
Authentic meaning that, of course, I disagreed with him on the wars.
Yes.
His votes, because he always voted to support the wars. But I saw Bernie as someone who was learning a lot. He was asking himself these questions that I encourage everyone to ask about, well, now, who am I? What do I stand for?
Yeah.
And I think Bernie had a come to Jesus meeting with Bernie. I had even been contacted by Black people in Vermont who said Bernie never paid any attention to us, you know?
Yeah.
And so, so there were many deficiencies in Bernie, in Senator Bernie. But candidate Bernie was learning a lot.
Yeah.
And candidate Bernie was the kind of person that we want as our president.
I agree.
So except for when candidate Bernie endorsed Hillary.
Yes.
So now that was
painful.
Sort of like the end for me.
Yeah,
okay.
That was painful.
So now, the way when all of that happened, Bernie should have been the majority leader. After all, Bernie had almost, well, if you look at it realistically, had bested the Democratic nominee. And so in terms of rewarding merit, then the merit should have gone to Bernie and the reward should have been Democratic Party leader in the Senate. But that didn't happen.
Oh, I see what you mean. Yeah, I see what you mean. But yeah, I see what you mean. That
didn't happen.
After everything that took place, he was clearly the leader. Yeah.
With Chuck Schumer.
Yeah.
We ended up with Chuck Schumer because the people who control, ultimate control of the Democratic Party did not share Bernie's values. Bernie could not be counted on to toe the line of the scion of the Democratic Party. And that's how we ended up with Chuck Schumer.
Yeah.
So we have to understand that people who say, okay, we got to support the Democratic Party, you need to know what you're supporting.
Yeah. Agreed.
And what you're supporting is nothing that relates to your life.
Yeah.
I can tell you that. I've been there. I know these people. I know them personally. I know them all.
Wow. I look at this stuff from the outside, and I look at based on, it's like, what are they supporting? What are they backing? I don't necessarily care what they say. I care what they do. And yeah, I become cynical of the process. It's like, it's hard to look at politics and not to become cynical of the process. They're completely and utterly detached from human beings. It's amazing.
Don't become cynical. Please don't become cynical.
Let me say, I'm optimistically cynical.
Innovated for revolution and learn some new words. Go back to the old words.
Let me say optimistically cynical. And I say it, and I know that sounds weird. I say that because I don't think I could do this channel if I was so beaten and cynical where I just sat in a corner and just babbled. Like, it comes from this thing of these ideas in my head of what the system could be. There's nothing forcing this to be this way. We can organize ourselves any way we want. And yet, this is how we are. And it's aggravating to have this thing in your head of this could be different versus the reality of Gina Haspel may be director of the CIA. You know what I mean? It's like this woman was a vicious torturer, and now this woman is going to potentially be the director of the CIA. Yeah, I've kept you on here for almost an hour, so I'm going to ask the last question. Is there anything that you may want to get across to the audience before I let you go? I always ask this question because if there's anything that we didn't talk about that you might want to talk about, I would ask you this, though. How did you end up in Bangladesh? I'm asking this purely from a personal standpoint because I love to travel, and I'm blown away by the fact you're in Bangladesh right now. But beyond that, is there anything else you would like to tell the audience before I let you go?
I'm inviting you and your wife to come and stay with me in Bangladesh. I'm doing that publicly so that on one of these broadcasts, you will be able to say, live from Bangladesh.
We may take you up on that. I was like, there's a live broadcast where she said this.
Okay, so I have two projects that I am working on. And I intend to spend a lot of time writing a proposal for one of those projects, which concerns ethical governance for the U.S. and
wow.
organizing people around ethical governance. So, it's a project that will take me into every one of our 50 states plus the District of Columbia.
Wow.
If I can get the funding for it, it will be a way for people of like mind to sit down at this. Well, actually, it's not just like mind, but how can I say this? People of different minds, but of like goals and objectives.
Okay.
To sit down at the table together and have discussions about how we can move forward, despite the kakistocracy and the psychopathocracy that is today the U.S. government.
Yeah.
So I have great expectations for, like you, the optimism is there. If I can get this project funded, I think that we will provide begin that process of building that I talked about. We have to build something else.
Yeah.
So this is the process of building. And then the other thing that I would like your audience to know is I've made a personal commitment to myself that for the month of August, starting in the month of August, I'm going to do my own video blog as well.
Nice.
And so,
nice.
Yeah. So I'll have you come on my show.
I will absolutely be happy to. I've loved this conversation. We were talking before the camera even started. He was like, "Hey, let's do this on air." No, I would love to come on your show. Just let me know.
Okay. Then that's the deal, and that's a wrap.
Fair enough. I really want to thank you for coming on. I've immensely enjoyed this. Oh, wait. How did you get to Bangladesh? That's the last point. How did you get to Bangladesh?
Well, it's a combination of all of these, but I began to answer when we were off air that Bangladeshi Americans, there was a powerful connection, and I came and I stayed.
Very nice. I mean, I'm always fascinated by this stuff. Look, I want to thank you very much for coming on. I really do. I know it's weird. It's like 9:30 here. I don't know what time it is there, but yeah. I appreciate you making a decision to come on. This is Cynthia McKinney, everyone.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Have a good one. Guys, I want to thank all of you for coming to the show, the live stream. She's awesome. She's awesome. We were talking before, and I found myself ending up kind of in somewhat of a conversation. And she's like, wait, let's do this on air. So, yeah, she's awesome. She's very cool. Let's see. Who's here? Wow, this call turned into more than Jamal could have hoped. What a great evening. Yeah, I love this call. I love this call. She puts me in the mind of family, if that makes sense. I know that sounds odd. But if I went to, a perfect example, going to my grandmother's house for like, let's say a Mother's Day something or some kind of family event, she would be somebody who would be there, meaning the personality, not necessarily that I know her. It just felt like she's, good people. I guess that's the way to put it. She feels like family. I'd say it that way. She feels like family. All right, guys. So I'm going to end this. This was awesome. I am going to tell my wife that we have an invite to Bangladesh. That's going to be one thing. But Professor Cynthia McKinney, thank you very much. I appreciate it. All right, guys. If you enjoy the content, please feel free to share, like, subscribe, and of course, you guys can always support the Patreon. Thanks, everyone. And once again, Cynthia, thank you very much, Professor Cynthia.